You have a headache. Maybe you've had it for a few hours, maybe since you woke up. And at some point, probably without thinking very hard about it, you walk to a cabinet, take out a small white pill, swallow it with water, and go back to whatever you were doing. 30 minutes later, the headache is gone. You didn't think about the chemistry. You didn't question whether it would work. You just knew. Now imagine the same headache, same pain. But the cabinet doesn't exist. The pill doesn't exist. The concept of a pill doesn't exist. You're standing in a forest 50,000 years ago. Your head is pounding, and everything around you is simultaneously a potential solution and a potential poison. How did you know which was which? This is one of the most underappreciated mysteries in all of human history. How did early humans, without labs, without chemistry, without any formal system of knowledge transmission, build a pharmacological understanding of the natural world that was sophisticated enough to treat pain, infection, fever, wounds, and parasites, in some cases with compounds that modern science has since validated as genuinely effective? The answer involves biology, observation, accident, and one of the most remarkable examples of collective intelligence in the history of our species. Let's get into it. First, let's establish something that will reframe everything that follows. The plants that heal are, in many cases, the same plants that harm. The dose, the preparation method, the part of the plant used, the time of year it was harvested, all of these variables can shift the same plant from medicine to poison and back again. This is not a coincidence. It's chemistry. Plants evolved chemical compounds primarily as defenses against insects, against fungi, against bacteria, against being eaten. These same compounds, in the right concentrations, can be toxic to humans. But in smaller doses, or with different preparations, those same defensive chemicals interact with human biology in ways that can be genuinely therapeutic. Salicylic acid, the active compound in aspirin, occurs naturally in willow bark and in the leaves and berries of several other plants. Plants produce it as a defense signal, a kind of chemical alarm that spreads through the plant when it's under attack. For humans who consume it, it reduces inflammation and dulls pain. The willow didn't evolve to give humans headache relief. But human beings figured out, somewhere in the deep past, that chewing willow bark made things hurt less. The question is how? How do you get from forest full of plants to this specific bark, from this specific tree, prepared this specific way, relieves this specific kind of pain? The first answer is the most ancient one, and it operates below the level of conscious choice. The body itself is a pharmacological detection system. Humans and many other animals have evolved what researchers call zoopharmacognosy, the ability to self-medicate using plants, soil, insects, and other environmental materials. The word was coined by researcher Eloy Rodriguez at Cornell University, who first documented systematic self-medication in chimpanzees in the 1980s and 1990s. What Rodriguez and his colleagues observed was striking. Chimpanzees in Tanzania would occasionally swallow the leaves of a plant called Aspelia, not chewing them, but swallowing them whole in a way that looked uncomfortable and deliberate. They did this when they appeared to be ill. Analysis showed that Aspelia leaves contain compounds with antiparasitic properties. The chimps were, in effect, taking a targeted medication for intestinal parasites. But here's the crucial thing. They weren't doing it consciously, in the sense of reasoning through a pharmacological analysis. They were following an instinct, a drive towards certain plants when certain symptoms appeared, that had been shaped by evolution over millions of years. The knowledge, in other words, wasn't in their minds. It was in their bodies. Early humans carried the same basic capacity. The instinct to seek out specific environmental materials when experiencing specific symptoms is not a learned behavior. It's a biological inheritance from our primate ancestors. And it gave early humans a starting point, a crude but real pharmacological intuition that could be refined by observation and experience over generations. But instinct alone can't explain the sophisticated plant medicine that we know early humans possessed. For that, we need to talk about observation. Specifically, the observation of other animals. Across multiple traditional cultures, ethnobotanists have documented a consistent practice: watching what sick animals eat. when a dog eats grass, when a cat seeks out certain leaves, when an elephant makes a journey to a specific clay deposit. Traditional healers in many cultures interpret these behaviors as information. The animal, they reason, is seeking something its body needs. And sometimes they're right. Researcher Michael Huffman at Kyoto University has spent decades documenting animal self-medication across species and the degree to which traditional human knowledge of medicinal plants overlaps with plants used by animals for apparent therapeutic purposes. The overlap is striking. In multiple cases, plants used by chimpanzees for apparent self-medication are independently used by local human communities for the same conditions. This doesn't require any communication between the species. It requires only observation. Early humans watching animals, over thousands of years, could accumulate an enormous body of empirical evidence about which plants produced which effects. The forest was, in a sense, a living pharmacology textbook, written in the behavior of every animal that lived in it. Then there's the role of accident, because some of the most important medical discoveries in human history have been accidental, and there's no reason to think this was any less true for our earliest ancestors. A person with a wound rests against a particular tree. Days later, the wound seems less infected than similar wounds have been. Someone makes note. A person with a fever wanders to a stream and drinks from water that has been sitting with certain fallen leaves. The fever breaks faster than usual. A child with stomach pain is given the wrong plant by mistake, and the pain subsides. These accidents are not random noise. In a small group of early humans where everyone's health was closely observed and where any deviation from normal recovery was noteworthy, accidental discoveries could be recognized, repeated, and tested. Not in the formal sense of a controlled experiment, but in the informal sense of, that seemed to help. Let's try it again next time. Researcher Paul Alan Cox, an ethnobotanist at the Brain Chemistry Labs, has argued that early human discovery of medicinal plants should be understood as a long, distributed, multi-generational experiment, not conducted in a laboratory, but conducted across entire landscapes, by entire communities, over hundreds of thousands of years. The sample size was enormous. The observation period was longer than any modern clinical trial could ever be, and the stakes, survival, ensured that genuinely useful discoveries were retained and transmitted. The transmission of plant medicine knowledge is where the story becomes most human, because knowledge that dies with its discoverer is useless to the group. The evidence that early humans transmitted medical knowledge deliberately and systematically is substantial. The most direct evidence comes from archaeological sites. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, the same site where Neanderthal burials were found, there is contested but intriguing evidence of medicinal plant use. Pollen of plants with known medicinal properties found concentrated in burial contexts, suggesting plants may have been used in care of the dying or in ritual associated with death and healing. More recently, a 2023 study published in the Journal of Archaeological Science reported the discovery of plant material at a 77,000-year-old site in South Africa. Sibudu Cave, that appears to have been deliberately selected for its insect repellent and possibly medicinal properties. The plants found included species with documented antiparasitic and anti-inflammatory compounds. Someone chose these plants, and the choice suggests knowledge. But the most powerful evidence for early medicinal plant knowledge transmission is living, not archaeological. It's the plant medicine traditions of indigenous cultures around the world. Ethnobotanists who have studied traditional healing systems from the Amazon rainforest to the Congo Basin, from Aboriginal Australia to the Arctic, consistently find something remarkable: the pharmacological accuracy of traditional plant knowledge. Plants used for specific conditions often contain compounds that modern chemistry confirms are active against those conditions. Not always, not perfectly, but at a rate far above chance. How accurate specifically? A landmark study by researcher Paul Alan Cox and colleagues, analyzing traditional medicine systems across multiple cultures, found that plants used medicinally by traditional healers were significantly more likely to yield biologically active compounds in laboratory screening than randomly selected plants from the same regions. The traditional knowledge was pointing toward real chemistry. This means that across the thousands of years during which these knowledge systems developed, Something was working. Some combination of observation, accident, intuition, and transmission was successfully identifying genuinely active medicinal plants at a rate that cannot be explained by luck. And what was working, researchers now believe, was exactly the multi-generational experimental process described above, combined with one crucial additional element: the human capacity for detailed, narrative, transmissible knowledge. The ability to say not just this plant helped me, but this plant, these specific leaves, not the roots, collected in autumn, not spring, prepared as a tea, not eaten raw, given to someone with this specific combination of symptoms, in this specific dose, and to transmit that precise, contextual knowledge across generations, in story and in practice. There is something else worth sitting with here. The people who held this knowledge, the healers, the elders, the specialists who knew the forest's pharmacopoeia, were not random members of the group. They were specialists, and their specialization was recognized and protected. Across every traditional culture ever documented, there are specific roles for people who know plants. Medicine men, shamans, herbalists, healers. The titles differ enormously, but the social function is consistent. Someone in the group is designated as the keeper of plant knowledge. They are taught specifically. They practice specifically. And their knowledge is treated as a community resource, not a personal possession. This specialization is not just socially interesting. It's cognitively important. Plant medicine knowledge is complex enough that it benefits from dedicated practitioners. The number of plants in a given ecosystem, the variability in their effects based on preparation and dose and context, the rare and subtle signs that distinguish safe from dangerous use. This is not knowledge that a generalist can hold fully while also doing everything else required to survive. You need people who specialize. And the existence of specialized healers in early human groups implies something profound: a level of social organization sophisticated enough to support non-food producing specialists. A group that could afford to have someone spend significant time learning and practicing plant medicine was a group with sufficient surplus of food, of labor, of social trust to support division of labor. The healer is, in some ways, evidence of civilization before civilization had a name. Let me close with something that I think deserves to be said plainly. We are, right now, in the middle of a scientific effort to validate and recover traditional plant medicine knowledge before it disappears. Ethnobotanists working with traditional healers in the Amazon, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, are racing against the loss of languages, the deaths of knowledge holders, and the destruction of ecosystems to document plant medicine knowledge that took thousands of years to accumulate. Some of this knowledge has already led to significant modern medicines. The malaria drug artemisinin came from traditional Chinese medicine. The painkiller morphine was derived from the poppy, used medicinally for thousands of years. The cancer drug Taxol came from the Pacific yew tree, used by indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest. Every one of these was first discovered not by a modern researcher in a laboratory, but by a human being in a forest or a field, observing the world carefully, feeling the effects of a plant in their own body, and, crucially, telling someone else what they found. The person who first understood that willow bark dulled pain didn't know what salicylic acid was. They didn't know about cyclooxygenase enzymes or prostaglandin synthesis. They just knew it worked. And they told someone. And that someone told someone else. And 50,000 years later, their accumulated knowledge sits in a white pill in your medicine cabinet. That's not a small thing to have figured out. That might be one of the most important things we've ever figured out. If this one made you look at your medicine cabinet a little differently, you know what to do. I'll see you in the next one. There's a dimension of early plant medicine that almost never gets discussed, and it's the one that connects most directly to how knowledge actually spread across our species: trade. Long before there were cities or writing or formal commerce, there is evidence of exchange networks among early human groups. Shells found hundreds of miles from any coast. Obsidian from volcanic sources carried across vast distances. And almost certainly, though it leaves no direct archaeological trace, plants, plant preparations, and plant knowledge. When two groups met, what did they exchange? Food, tools, potential mates, information. And among the most valuable information any group could possess was, here is what grows near us that heals. Here is how we prepare it. Here is what it does. Archaeologist Kathy Schick at Indiana University has documented material exchange networks among early humans that extended hundreds of kilometers, networks that must have been built on trust, repeated contact, and shared interest. Medical knowledge, which benefits all parties, would have been a particularly valuable currency in these exchanges. A healer from one group demonstrating the use of a plant to healers from another group was sharing something that could save lives. And saving lives builds trust, and trust builds networks, and networks spread knowledge. This means that early plant medicine knowledge didn't just accumulate within single groups. It spread laterally across groups through exchange and encounter. Useful medical plants and their uses could travel hundreds of miles from their point of discovery, carried by human beings who understood their value and were willing to share it. And there is one final thing I want to say about the people who did this work. The healers, the plant knowledge holders, the ones who spent their lives learning what the forest offered. They were, in every culture where we have records, deeply respected, not just useful, not just tolerated as specialists, respected, honored. Their knowledge was treated as sacred in many traditions, not because it was mystical, but because it was powerful. The power to relieve suffering, to reverse what looked like certain death, to give back to someone the life that was slipping away. This was understood, in every culture that has ever existed, as something extraordinary. And it was extraordinary. It still is. The next time you take a painkiller, or swallow an antibiotic, or use a topical antiseptic, the chemistry is modern, the pill is modern, the manufacturing is modern. But the original insight, the first human understanding that certain plants could do certain things to certain symptoms, is ancient beyond measure. It was hard-won across unimaginable time and effort by human beings who had nothing but their bodies, their observations, their relationships, and their willingness to try again after failure. You are the beneficiary of every one of them. And if this one made you feel that inheritance a little more clearly, you know what to do. I'll see you in the next one. Let's also talk about something that tends to get left out entirely. Failure. Because the story of early plant medicine is not only a story of discovery and success, it is equally a story of getting it wrong, of people who paid with their lives for knowledge that was then passed on. The dose that healed and the dose that killed were sometimes separated by very little. The preparation that was safe and the one that was fatal could look identical. Early plant medicine practitioners worked in conditions of genuine uncertainty, with real consequences for error. And yet the knowledge kept accumulating, because the group remembered, because failure, when it was observed and survived or observed in others, was as informative as success. A plant that killed in this preparation, but seemed to reduce fever in that one, that was data. Painful, costly data, but data. Researcher Wade Davis, an ethnobotanist who spent years documenting traditional plant knowledge in Haiti and other cultures, has written about how traditional plant knowledge systems are built as much on knowledge of what doesn't work as on knowledge of what does. The prohibitions, don't use this, don't combine these, don't prepare it this way, are often as sophisticated and as important as the positive recommendations. And they represent the accumulated cost of getting it wrong, encoded into cultural practice so that others don't have to pay the same price. This is, in its way, a form of scientific knowledge, not systematic, not controlled, not written down, but real, tested, expensive knowledge paid for in the hardest possible currency and transmitted with the same urgency as anything else a community knew mattered for survival. The forest wasn't a mystery to be unlocked by clever individuals. It was a shared project, worked on by everyone, across thousands of years, at enormous cost. And what came out of it was remarkable enough that we are still benefiting from it today. There is one more layer to this story that I find genuinely moving. The relationship between plant medicine knowledge and the status of women in early human groups. Across the ethnobotanical literature, the documented record of traditional plant knowledge around the world, there is a consistent and striking pattern. Plant medicine knowledge, and particularly the knowledge related to childbirth, infant health, wound treatment, and daily health maintenance, is disproportionately held by women. Not exclusively, not universally, but consistently, across cultures that have never been in contact with each other, women are the primary repositories of day-to-day medicinal plant knowledge. The explanation is not mysterious. Women in traditional societies spend more time in close proximity to the plant environment around settlements, gathering food, tending children, processing plant materials. They observe more. They experiment more, out of necessity. And they transmit more, because the health knowledge required for childcare is among the most urgently needed and most frequently shared. Researcher Mormon Daniel at the University of Michigan, who has built the most comprehensive database of Native American plant medicine ever assembled, has noted that the medicinal plant knowledge held by women in traditional communities often focuses on conditions that are common, recurring, and require immediate response, exactly the conditions where accumulated, precise, transmissible knowledge has the highest survival value. This means that some of the most ancient and most important pharmacological knowledge in human history was primarily developed, held, transmitted, and applied by women. Not by shamans or medicine men alone, not by specialized ritual practitioners, by mothers, by grandmothers, by the people who were there when someone got sick, who knew what grew nearby, and who remembered what had helped before. That knowledge shaped us. It kept us alive through infections that should have been fatal, through childbirths that should have killed, through fevers that should have broken the wrong way. And it did so quietly, without ceremony, in the daily texture of keeping a group alive. It deserves to be remembered,